Autumn of 9 AD. In these dense woods, Germania buries three of Rome's finest legions alive. 15,000 soldiers vanish forever. How did one man shatter the empire's might? At the beginning of the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire stands at the absolute peak of its global power. Its iron legions marching across continents, seemingly invincible to any foe on earth. But here, on the cold, mist-shrouded banks of the mighty Rhine River, the comfort of civilization abruptly ends, and a dangerous land of eternal fog, deep fear, and untamed wilderness begins. This is Germania, a vast and endless primeval chaos of completely impenetrable dark forests, treacherous bogs, and fierce independent tribes who fiercely guard their ancient ancestral lands from invaders. To the refined and educated Roman citizen, this dark northern world felt like pure, unadulterated hell, a place where nature itself conspired against the grand designs of imperial conquest. Yet, the insatiable empire constantly hungers for new territories, submissive slaves, and rich resources, believing the Roman eagle was destined to soar across all of Europe without knowing any bounds. On these rugged Germanic lands, stone forts steadily rise and military roads are built, as Rome begins to ruthlessly suffocate the free local tribes with heavy taxes and rigid imperial law. Publius Quinctilius Varus arrives to enforce this unforgiving new order, a stern governor who is blindly confident in Rome's absolute supremacy and the total, unquestioning obedience of the conquered local chiefs. But beneath a false mask of submission, a bitter, dangerous rage festers deeply among the tribes. Roman rule brought nothing but humiliation, and the clans secretly begin preparing for a bloody war. The arrogant Romans do not yet realize that the ancient Teutoburg Forest itself silently and menacingly watches their every single step, tracking the heavy movement of the marching legions through the trees. Alongside the unsuspecting Varus marches a brilliant man capable of changing the course of history, Arminius, a young, highly charismatic Germanic chieftain currently serving under the flag of the Roman Empire. Having been raised in Rome as a noble hostage, he gained full citizenship and prestigious equestrian rank, appearing to the Roman elite as one of their own, a perfect product of civilization. But Arminius secretly remembered his true roots, and he perfectly understood complex Roman military tactics, the hidden structural weaknesses of the heavy legions, and the deep psychological flaws of their proud centurions. Therefore, Quinctilius Varus completely and blindly trusts him, foolishly seeing a loyal ally and the ultimate indispensable guide who can lead his vast army through these dark, alien, and treacherous northern lands. While the governor confidently makes grand plans for total subjugation, Arminius plays a deadly double game, secretly meeting with the fierce chieftains of the long-divided Germanic tribes under the deep cover of night. Bitter ancient enemies unite for the very first time within the grim shadows of ancient trees, as the charismatic Arminius ignites a powerful, shared flame of total vengeance against occupying Rome. The brilliant master plan is finally set, and Arminius cleverly reports a false rebellion deep inland, creating a perfect, irresistible bait to lure the entire Roman army deep into the treacherous wilderness. Varus greedily takes the bait and immediately orders the massive march, while Arminius personally leads the way, guiding the proud legions directly toward a grim and utterly catastrophic doom in the dark. The magnificent Roman legions confidently leave their safe, heavily fortified summer camp, marching out in precise, orderly formations to face a tragic, bloody destiny that none of them could possibly foresee. Dark, ominous storm clouds gather heavily over the ancient Germanic canopy, and a relentless, freezing autumn rain begins to fall, soaking the ground and turning the forest floor into a treacherous mire. The massive imperial army is slowly dragged into the thick, claustrophobic brush, causing the overextended Roman column to dangerously stretch for many miles along the incredibly narrow and winding wilderness path. Heavy, cumbersome baggage trains, panicked camp followers, terrified pack animals, and bulky military equipment severely hinder the march, grinding the movement of the entire 3 legions to a near-total standstill. The primitive road rapidly transforms into a narrow, suffocating mud trap, tightly squeezed between a treacherous, bottomless swamp on one side and high, heavily forested hills teeming with hidden dangers on the other. The massive iron-rimmed wheels of the heavy Roman supply carts become hopelessly and deeply stuck in the thick, sticky, and incredibly slippery Germanic mud, fracturing the cohesion of the military column. A highly experienced and battle-hardened centurion grows deeply anxious, noting that the advanced Roman scouts sent ahead into the dense tree line have mysteriously and ominously failed to return to the vanguard. However, Governor Quintilius Varus remains absolutely calm and dismissive, blindly unaware of the catastrophic, inescapable trap that is rapidly and silently closing around his entirely vulnerable and exposed army. At this exact critical moment, Arminius quietly leaves the Roman headquarters, vanishing completely into the deep, dark forest under the clever guise of conducting a personal, independent scouting mission ahead. Shrouded in the thick, chilling dawn mist, hundreds of heavily armed Germanic warriors coldly and patiently watch the completely defenseless, vastly overextended Roman column moving slowly through the valley below. Suddenly, a piercing, terrifying whistle tears through the damp air, and a heavy Germanic spear violently pierces a frontline Roman scout, making the seasoned veterans shudder as blood spills onto the mud. Thousands of startled pitch-black birds erupt from the dense forest canopy, filling the darkened, rainy sky with a chaotic, screeching roar that serves as a sinister, terrifying omen of impending mass death. From the impenetrable, pitch-black darkness of the dense woods, the first crushing, terrifying blow of furious Germanic warriors hits the overextended column, unleashing absolute hell upon the startled and trapped legionaries. At the very rear of the heavily wounded column, absolute panic and chaotic madness spread with terrifying speed among the terrified servants, helpless camp followers, and violently overturned baggage wagons. A brave, battle-tested Roman centurion screams fiercely above the din, desperately trying to rally his frightened, bleeding legionaries into a cohesive defensive battle line through the blinding, relentless autumn downpour. The famously heavy rectangular Roman shields sink uselessly into the thick, swallowing mud, completely stripping the desperate soldiers of their primary tactical advantage and leaving them entirely exposed to enemy blades. Watching the seemingly endless, ferocious waves of attacking tribal warriors pour from the hills, the horrified legionaries finally realize with absolute terror that this is not a minor local riot, but a full-scale war. The ancient, dark Teutoburg Forest ruthlessly and completely closes around the desperate Roman army, effectively cutting off any possible path of retreat, escape, or survival from this bloody green slaughterhouse. The grueling, agonizing second day of the continuous, unyielding slaughter begins, utterly erasing the very last hopes of survival for the deeply traumatized, trapped soldiers fighting for their lives in the rain. Exhausted, freezing, and heavily wounded, Romans desperately attempt to construct a fortified nightly camp directly in the deep, incredibly slippery and blood-soaked mud, their hands trembling from sheer physical fatigue. Under the absolute cover of pitch-black night and a pouring, deafening rainstorm, the furious Germans launch a sudden, incredibly fierce, and completely merciless night assault from every single direction at once. Savage Germanic warriors strike with lightning speed from the deep shadows, silently slaughtering the confused, exhausted sentries before vanishing instantly and completely back into the safety of the dark, whispering woods. The completely unfortunate and broken Quintilius Varus loses all remaining control over his scattered, shattered column, falling into a state of deep, paralyzing despair as the true horror unfolds around him. A heavily wounded centurion, bleeding profusely from multiple gashes, bravely gathers the stubborn remnants of his battered cohort for one final, heroic, and completely desperate stand in the dark heart of the forest. The sacred golden eagle of the legion, the ultimate and revered symbol of Roman military honor, power, and imperial pride, now faces the deeply shameful, unthinkable threat of being captured by barbarians. Ferocious Germanic warriors attack ruthlessly from the steep heights of the forested hills, raining down a devastating, unending storm of heavy stones and sharp javelins upon the completely helpless, trapped Romans. Along the narrow, treacherous forest path, abandoned and broken Roman baggage wagons catch fire, brilliantly illuminating the massive, horrifying scale of the catastrophic slaughter that is unfolding in the wilderness. Panicked, screaming soldiers entirely abandon their valuable personal property, looted gold and heavy armor, desperately trying to save their bare lives in the chaotic, bloody nightmare of the wet forest. The legendary ironclad Roman discipline, forged and tested through centuries of spectacular global victories, completely and permanently collapses under the unbearable, crushing weight of primal, paralyzing terror and widespread madness. Driven completely mad by overwhelming grief and failure, Governor Varus finally and clearly realizes the truly monstrous, inescapable scale of the brilliant strategic trap that his trusted friend Arminius laid for him. The once mighty, unbreakable Roman battle line shatters completely, instantly transforming a proud, regular imperial army into a heavily disorganized, panicked crowd of doomed men who are utterly marked for a brutal death. Riddled with numerous enemy arrows, the sacred golden eagle of the defeated legion plummets heavily into the bloody, churned mud, symbolically marking the absolute historic downfall of Roman military arrogance in Germany. The desperate remnants of the shattered cohorts gather their remaining strength to make one final, completely suicidal attempt to violently break through the dense, unyielding rows of victorious, shouting Germanic warriors. The dying, wounded centurion, with bitter, hot tears streaming down his weathered face, helplessly watches the inevitable, horrific, and absolute annihilation of his beloved, once proud, and supposedly invincible legion. An entirely exhausted, mentally broken Quintilius Varus is left completely alone amidst the burning, screaming chaos, fully knowing that a shameful barbarian captivity is a fate far worse than a quick death. This was the crushing, humiliating end of Roman arrogance and imperial confidence, completely shattered against the brutal, unforgiving reality of the wild, untamed Germanic forests and the vengeance of its free people. The dark, wet autumn forest fills to the brim with agonizing, dying screams, the harsh clashing of cold iron, and the wild, ruthless triumph of the victorious, united Germanic tribes celebrating their freedom. The very last scattered, isolated groups of desperate Roman legionaries are completely surrounded by a dense, unbreakable ring of shouting enemies, bravely fighting their final hopeless battle to the absolute bitter end. Arminius stands in complete heavy silence, looking out over the vast corpse-strewn forest clearing, coldly contemplating the total absolute destruction of the once feared and mighty invading army of Imperial Rome. 3 elite, legendary Roman legions have completely and permanently vanished into the vast, dark, and utterly ominous depths of the unforgiving, blood-stained Teutoburg Forest, never to be seen alive again. A cold, deeply misty morning finally arrives after the terrible historic slaughter, brutally exposing the true nightmarish scale of the single greatest, most humiliating military defeat in the entire history of the empire. The silent, eerie, and empty forest is heavily littered with thousands of broken iron-rimmed shields, shattered spears, dead horses, and the pale, cold bodies of fallen Roman soldiers rotting in the mud. Triumphant, cheering Germanic warriors eagerly gather rich Roman spoils, weapons, and armor, wildly celebrating their ultimate monumental victory over a powerful, highly advanced foe that was previously thought to be completely invincible. The captured, heavily desecrated golden eagles of the ruined legions become a grim, eternal reminder to the ancient world that Rome is certainly not all-powerful or untouchable on this wild earth. Far away, the distant, anxious military camps along the Rhine River wait in a heavy, terrified silence for those thousands of brave soldiers who will now never return from the dark northern woods. The terrible, unbelievable news of the unimagined, total catastrophe in the depths of the Teutoburg Forest flies swiftly and terrifyingly southward, straight toward the unsuspecting, wealthy heart of the great Roman Empire. The deeply aging, devastated Emperor Augustus learns of the historic disaster in a dead, horrified silence before crying out in absolute despair and repeatedly striking his head against the palace walls. From this monumental day forward, the aggressive territorial expansion of the massive Roman Empire permanently stops, halting forever at the harsh, unyielding, and fiercely guarded banks of the great Rhine River. Against all odds, Germania successfully defends its sacred independence and remains entirely, proudly free, never again submitting to the iron, crushing will of imperial Rome or its greedy marching legions. Great empires eventually turn to dust and ash, but the memory of history's monumental battles lives through the ages like an eternal, immortal phoenix.